My friend, have you ever felt like something is walking through your blood that doesn't belong to you? Something like a thin layer of ice wrapping around your heart, making every breath you take feel colder than the last. I'm Thomas. If you're hearing this, it means I no longer exist, or at least, the thing standing before you isn't the same Thomas you used to know. It all started with a cursed map, a piece of ancient, worn-out papyrus I found among my grandfather's keepsakes. My grandfather was a strange man. He always talked about a treasure that couldn't be found in any bank. I thought the old man had lost his mind, but when I translated that map with 1,000 hardships, flipping through ancient books, I realized the scent of real money was in the air. The scent of gold. But back then, I was a fool. I didn't understand that gold under the earth always carries the scent of death. Joseph, Anthony, and Christopher, we had been together since we were kids. 30 years of friendship. When I showed them the map, they laughed at first. They said, "Thomas, you've lost it again." But when I read the coordinates to them and told them where this treasure was buried, I saw that spark of greed in their eyes. My plan was for us to go at night. We didn't want anyone to catch wind of it. We didn't want the government, the police, or even a random intruder to take a share of that windfall. We took my car and hit the road. A road that led to a remote village, a place that felt like even God hadn't visited in years. In the car, Christopher was constantly messing with his lighter. The click-click sound of that lighter in that heavy silence of the road hit my head like a sledgehammer. Joseph, who was the most muscular of us all, stared silently out the window. Anthony, who was always the group's mastermind, was rechecking the map. My hands were on the steering wheel, but I had a strange sensation. It felt like the closer we got to that village, the more the road was swallowing us. The trees along the road were bent in a way that looked like they were creating a tunnel of horror for us. No cars were coming from the opposite direction. There was no light except for the weak glow of my car's headlights, which barely cut through the darkness. When we reached the entrance of the village, we hid the car a bit further away, among the tall bushes. We got out. The smell of damp earth and something like the stench of a rotting corpse was in the air. The village was in a deep sleep. Not even the dogs were barking. This absolute silence was worse than any noise. We opened the map. The treasure was right in the middle of the village's old cemetery, a place where the tombstones had crumbled under the pressure of time. With shovels and pickaxes, we entered the cemetery through the low stone wall like thieves. The fog was crawling on the ground as if it was touching our feet. We searched and searched until we reached that specific grave. A grave that had no flowers on it, no candles lit. Just a black, rough stone with a man's name on it. A man who had been 40 when he died, and now 50 years had passed since his burial. Anthony said, "Thomas, are you sure it's here?" I said, "The map doesn't lie. The treasure is right under the head of this criminal." They said that before his death, he buried all his possessions with him so that no one could get their hands on them. Christopher swallowed hard and said, "Let's dig it up. Let's be quick. We need to be done before dawn breaks." We started. The sound of the pickaxe hitting the hard ground echoed through that cemetery. With every blow we struck the earth, it felt like a faint tremor shook the entire graveyard. We pushed the soil aside. 0.5 meter, 1 meter, 2 meters. The air grew colder by the second. A strange chill was blowing out from inside the grave itself. It felt like the earth was freezing from the inside out. When Joseph's pickaxe hit something hard, we all froze. It was the slab. A wide, dark stone that seemed to bear the weight of all that man's sins. Joseph lifted the stone with a lever. As soon as the stone cracked open, a horrific stench, the smell of rotting meat and toxic underground gases, hit us in the face. We all took several steps back, but it wasn't just a smell. A loud moan, a muffled scream that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well, rose from the grave. The wind blew as if someone was screaming into our ears. Our flashlights suddenly started flickering. The shadows around us, on the other tombstones, began to move. It was as if the dead were rising from their spots. Christopher shrieked and dropped the shovel. He said, "This isn't normal, Thomas. We shouldn't have opened this grave. That man's spirit, he has awakened. I wanted to say don't be afraid, but my own tongue was tied. Suddenly, I saw a pair of red eyes staring at us right from the darkness of the grave. That being, that evil spirit, was angry that we had disturbed his 50-year sleep for the greed of gold. Suddenly, all our flashlights went out. In that absolute darkness, we heard the laughter of a wild man circling around our heads. Fear gripped us so tightly that we no longer thought about the treasure. We just wanted to run. We took off at a run. We jumped over graves, passing through branches that caught our clothes like claws. We got away from the village and headed into the forest that was nearby. We didn't dare go back to the car, because the car was near the cemetery and we were afraid that cursed spirit would be waiting for us there. The way back to the village was also closed. If we went to the villagers, they would find out we had dug up the grave of that criminal, and then they would bury us alive themselves. Our only choice was the forest. Right there, among the massive and terrifying trees, we found a small spot and, with shivering and terror, made a small fire just so we could see each other's faces. But we didn't know that the spirit was already among us. The forest fire struggled with the damp wood, and the four of us huddled around those flickering flames as if we wanted to hide inside each other's bodies. The crackling of the burning timber was the only thing breaking the deathly silence of the woods. Joseph was shaking so hard I could hear his teeth chattering. Christopher had his head buried in his hands, whispering prayers under his breath. Prayers it was clear even he didn't believe in. Anthony, however, with his sharp eyes, kept staring into the darkness behind us. Me? I felt strange. It was as if 100-kilogram weight was pressing down on my chest. A persistent chill had started from the tips of my toes and was creeping up, inch by inch. I thought it was from the shock of what happened at the cemetery, but I was wrong. That cold was the footprint of someone making themselves at home inside my soul. Suddenly, Anthony stood up. His face had turned white as chalk. With a trembling finger, he pointed to a boulder right behind me, hidden among the bushes. We all turned. The orange light of the fire fell upon the smooth surface of the stone. At first, I thought it was moss or the shadow of a tree, but then I saw a thick, dark liquid oozing over the rock as if it had just burst from the veins of a living creature. The red fluid began to take shape. Letters crawled across the stone one by one, like bloodworms. The stench of iron and clotted blood filled the air. It read, "One of you is no longer himself. My spirit is now inside one of your bodies. If you do not kill him, he will slaughter you all, one by one. Before the sun rises, either he dies, or you all join me." Our breath hitched. Christopher suddenly jumped up and backed away a few steps. He drew his hunting knife from its sheath. The glint of the blade under the firelight was even more terrifying than the writing. He glared at us and said, "Which one of you is it? Which one of you let that bastard into his body?" Joseph stammered, "Christopher, calm down. This must be a trick. That spirit wants to scare us." But Anthony remained silent. His gaze shifted between the three of us. He was always the smartest, and that intelligence was now becoming our greatest enemy. I felt something shift inside my brain. A muffled sound, like the scuttling of a centipede on dry leaves, echoed in my head. That criminal spirit was telling me what to do. It was as if it was teaching me how to move my 30-year friends like chess pieces. A crooked smile crossed my lips that wasn't my own, but I quickly wiped it away. I turned to Christopher and, in a tone that sounded deeply concerned, said, "Christopher, remember back at the cemetery, when we lifted the slab? Who was closest? Who was the one that black smoke hit first?" Christopher narrowed his eyes and stared at Joseph. Joseph, who was terrified out of his mind, shouted, "No. Matthew, what are you saying? I was just pulling the stone." But I wouldn't let up. That thing inside me was giving me power. I said, "Joseph, why are your hands shaking? Why did your eyes suddenly turn so red? Look at how he's sweating. These are the same signs written on the stone." In that moment, reason and logic fled the forest. There was only instinct. The instinct of survival. Christopher, who had a long-standing grudge against Joseph over a girl from years ago, felt the spark of his hatred ignite. He flipped the knife in his hand. Joseph backed away, tripped over a root, and fell to the ground. He screamed, "Anthony, say something. Matthew is lying. I'm still Joseph." But Anthony just watched. It was as if he was weighing the possibility that if Joseph really was possessed, killing him would be for the benefit of everyone. I quietly walked over to Christopher and placed my hand on his shoulder. He felt the coldness of my hand, but he thought it was from my fear. I whispered into his ear, "If you don't finish this right now, he'll rip us apart once we fall asleep. Look at how he's staring at your knife. He's waiting for an opening." Christopher lost all control. He let out a primal scream and lunged at Joseph. The sound of their struggle in that silent forest was like an explosion. Joseph tried to grab Christopher's hands, but Christopher was striking as if he were hacking at a piece of wood. The knife went up and down. The squelch of metal sinking into flesh mixed with Joseph's muffled groans. Blood splattered across Christopher's face, making him look like a true demon. Anthony and I just stood there watching. Anthony held his hand over his mouth, gagging, but me? I was enjoying it. That thirst for blood that had sprouted within me was being quenched with every drop of blood spilling from Joseph's body. When Joseph's thrashing finally stopped, Christopher rose from the corpse, gasping for air. His arms were bloody up to the elbows. The knife fell from his hand onto the ground. He stared at his friend's body and suddenly began to cry. He said, "What have I done? Matthew, I killed my friend." In a cold tone that even frightened myself, I said, "You didn't kill your friend, Christopher. You destroyed a monster. You saved us." But Anthony, who had been silent until then, suddenly switched on his flashlight and aimed it at me. The harsh beam hit my eyes. He said, "Matthew, why didn't you take even a single step back while Joseph was dying? Why didn't you even blink when the blood splattered on your clothes?" Anthony was beginning to understand. He could smell the stench of that spirit coming from inside my body. I had to change the game fast, or I would be the next one targeted. The fire was sputtering out, and the wood no longer had the strength to burn. Joseph's corpse lay in the corner, the smell of his warm blood mixing with the damp scent of the forest. Christopher lay on the ground like a lifeless piece of meat, clawing at the dirt with his bloody hands. Anthony, however, wouldn't take that damn flashlight off my face. Its light pierced my eyes like a polished dagger. The beam of Anthony's flashlight was trembling. I could hear his heartbeat from 2 meters away. That malevolent spirit inside my body had given me such power that it felt as if my sense of smell had increased tenfold. I could smell Anthony's fear, the sour scent of the sweat dripping from his forehead. With a voice barely forced from his throat, Anthony said, "Thomas, something inside you has changed. You were never this ruthless. Why did you let Christopher tear Joseph apart so easily?" I took a step forward. The flashlight's beam played across my chest. In a calm voice, as if singing a terrifying lullaby, I said, "Anthony, old friend, I only wanted to see the truth. Didn't you see the writing on the stone? Didn't you smell the stench of that grave? I only wanted us to survive." But Anthony was smarter than that. He used the tip of his foot to pull the bloody knife on the ground toward himself. Christopher suddenly raised his head. His face, covered in tears and Joseph's blood, had become a horrific mask. He stared at Anthony and then at me. I saw that now was the best time to deliver the final blow to this rotting friendship. I turned to Christopher and said, "Christopher, brother, do you see how Anthony is looking at us? Do you see how he's keeping the knife close to himself? He was watching the whole time. He didn't let you and Joseph reconcile. He wanted one of you eliminated so his share of the treasure would be greater." Confused, Christopher said, "What are you saying, Thomas?" Anthony didn't do anything. With a bitter smirk, I said, "Exactly. He did nothing. Because he wanted your hands to be bloody. Now that Joseph is dead, the next person standing in his way to the gold is you. Why do you think he's picking on me now? Because he wants to distract you so he can stab you in the back. Look, see how he's hidden the knife under his foot." Christopher, his mind completely paralyzed by fear and guilt, turned his gaze toward Anthony's feet. Anthony shouted, "Christopher, don't listen to him. This isn't Thomas talking. The spirit of that bastard criminal is inside him. He's turning us against each other." But I said in a composed tone, "Anthony, if I am possessed, why are Christopher's hands bloody? Why are you threatening us with a knife? Who is truly dangerous here?" Inside me, that creature was cackling. I felt the veins in my body turning black. Christopher stood up. He was no longer our kind friend. He had become a wounded animal that only wanted to survive. He pulled out another knife he had hidden in his boot. Anthony backed away and hit a thick tree. He screamed, "Christopher, I beg you, open your eyes. Thomas is playing us." I sat right there by the fire and started playing with the still hot ashes with a piece of wood. It was as if I were watching a theater performance. Christopher approached Anthony step by step. He whispered, "You want to kill me? You want to take the gold? Joseph died because of you. It's all your fault for not letting us find out who was really possessed." Anthony raised the knife to defend himself. That defensive move was like an order to attack in Christopher's shattered mind. Christopher let out a roar that startled all the sleeping birds in that forest. He lunged at Anthony. This time the struggle was much more intense. Anthony didn't want to kill Christopher. He just wanted to stop him. But Christopher was striking as if he were fighting his own shadow. They rolled in the darkness behind the trees, and the sound of their bodies hitting the bushes and their loud groans echoed throughout the entire forest. As I sat there, I tilted my head and looked at the bloody writing on the stone. The writing was slowly fading, as if its job was done. That evil spirit told me, "Look, see how they tear each other apart. This is the same world I lived in, a world of blood and betrayal." Suddenly, a loud scream was heard, followed by silence. A heavy silence where even the sound of the wind couldn't be heard. A few moments later, a person's shadow appeared from among the trees. He was limping toward the fire. At first, I thought it was Christopher, but when he stepped into the weak light of the flames, I saw it was Anthony. His clothes were torn to shreds, and he had a deep wound on his arm with blood dripping from it. In his hand was a sharp, bloody piece of wood. Anthony knelt at the edge of the fire. He was taking deep, shaky breaths. He raised his head and stared at me. His face was contorted with rage and grief. He said, "It's over. Christopher is gone too. I killed him with my own hands because he was choking me. Are you satisfied now? Is your share and that demons inside your body greater now?" I stood up. I brushed the dirt off my clothes. I felt as if I had grown taller, my voice sounding distant and more alien. I flashed a smile that no longer bore any resemblance to Thomas's smile. I said, "Anthony, you were always the smartest of us. But being smart is worthless in the face of fate. We came for treasure, and now the treasure is right here, in this pure experience of death." Anthony looked at me with hatred and said, "Thomas, if there's even a shred of my friend left in that cursed body, listen to me. I know that spirit is telling you what to do, but I won't let you leave this forest alive. I won't allow you to carry this filth back to the city with you." The fire had lost its vigor. It was now just a pile of glowing embers that shimmered in the dark like the eyes of a predatory beast. Anthony stood before me, wounded, exhausted, but with eyes that seemed newly awakened. Anthony limped back a few steps and leaned against a tree trunk. The blood on his arm had darkened, glistening like tar under the starlight. His gaze passed over the corpses of Joseph and Christopher before locking onto me again. With a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well, he said, "Thomas, do you know the difference between me and those two? They had faith in our friendship. That's why they were so easily played. But me, I always knew there was a darkness inside you waiting for a spark. That map, that treasure, it was just an excuse for you to show your true self." I laughed, but this laughter didn't come from my throat. It sounded like thousands of bronze coins being shaken in a metal container. A raspy, ancient voice emerged from my mouth. Anthony, clever Anthony, you always loved being a philosopher. But philosophers are the first to be slaughtered in the abattoir. Thomas no longer exists. He's just a spectator now, watching my performance in horror from the back of his mind. Anthony suddenly stood up straight, as if he had forgotten his pain. He picked up his flashlight from the ground and shone the beam directly into my eyes. No, Thomas is still there. I see him. I see him struggling under the pressure of your hands. You're just a 50-year-old parasite that crawled out of a damp grave. Did you think you could turn us against each other and then just go back to your life? With a swift movement that would be impossible for an ordinary human body, I lunged at him. But Anthony seemed to be expecting this move. He dodged quickly and struck my side with the same sharp piece of wood he had used to take down Christopher. A strange pain shot through my body, not the kind a human feels. I felt a wisp of that black smoke inside me leak out. I recoiled. Anthony screamed, "Come on, come closer, you bastard. I'm not afraid of death. I killed my friends with my own hands tonight. I have nothing left to lose. But I won't let you leave this forest with my friend's body." I circled Anthony like a wolf circling its prey. Dry branches snapped under my feet. But the sound that reached the ears wasn't the sound of human footsteps. It was as if something heavier and coarser was being dragged across the ground. I turned to him and said, "Anthony, do you think you can destroy a spirit that has stored half a century of malice with a piece of wood?" I counted every single second in that grave. I ate the dirt and broke bread with the worms. You know nothing of hunger. Anthony's tone suddenly changed. A strange calm entered his voice. He said, "You know, Thomas, your grandfather always said the real treasure wasn't in that map. He said this map was a test to see how well you could resist the devil within yourself. Thomas failed, but I am still alive." At that moment, I felt the ground beneath my feet tremble. A violent wind whistled through the trees, and a strange murmur echoed from the depths of the forest. It was as if everyone buried in that cemetery was marching toward us. Anthony reached into his pocket and pulled out a lighter. It was Christopher's old lighter that he had picked up from the ground. "Thomas, do you remember when we were kids, how you were afraid of fire? You used to say fire is the only thing that scares away the shadows." Anthony said this and flicked the lighter. The tiny flame glowed like a sun in that thick darkness. He began to approach the dry bushes surrounding me. I backed away. The evil spirit within my body loathed fire. I felt my skin burning, as if the flames were licking my soul from a distance. I screamed, "Enough, Anthony. You'll kill yourself with this. This whole forest will go up in flames in a second." Anthony flashed a smile I had never seen before, a free, reckless smile. "Let it burn. Let us all burn. That way, none of us will have to live with this sin. Thomas, if you can hear my voice, now is the time. Fight it." In an instant, control of my body was split between me and that spirit. My left hand began to shake and tried to grab my own throat. I was fighting myself. Anthony threw the lighter onto a pile of dry leaves and gasoline that had leaked from the car's tank, carried in a container, and spilled on the ground. The flames suddenly roared up, standing like a crimson wall between Anthony and me. I was trapped in the circle of fire. That malevolent spirit was screaming, a sound that would tear the eardrum of any living creature. But Anthony was standing on the other side of the wall of fire, looking at me with eyes full of tears. He knew that this was the end for all of us. The fire roared as if a dragon had emerged from the heart of the earth. Its scorching heat melted your face, and the thick smoke burned your eyes. I was in the middle of this hell. Half of my being was Thomas crying out in pain, and the other half was that foul creature cowering from the heat. A wall of fire rose between Anthony and me. The flames crawled like hungry snakes toward the dry branches of the trees, and the sound of wet wood exploding echoed in my ears like a constant barrage of gunfire. I was rolling on the ground. My left hand, commanded by the real Thomas, tried to claw at the dirt to get away from the fire, but my right hand, under the power of that spirit, gripped the knife tightly, looking for a way toward Anthony. Anthony stood on the other side of the flames. His shadow stretched across the ground as if a wounded giant were watching me. He shouted, "Thomas, you're burning. Can you feel it? This is the real pain of that treasure you were looking for. Let that filth burn away with your clothes. Let it turn to ash." I opened my mouth to answer, but instead of words, a thick black liquid spurted out of my throat. That spirit was eating me from the inside so it could withstand the heat. The sound that came from my throat no longer resembled a human's. It was a low growl that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. I stood up. My skin was blistering under the heat, but that evil spirit gave me the strength to ignore the pain. I moved through the burning bushes. Passing through the fire felt as if thousands of hot needles were being driven into my body at once. When I broke through the wall of fire, Anthony was shocked. He didn't think I could come out of that hell alive. He held that sharp piece of wood in front of himself, but his hands were shaking as if they were waving in the wind. I approached him with heavy steps. With every step I took, a piece of the burnt flesh of my clothes fell to the ground. I said, "Anthony, did you think a pile of firewood could stop me? I come from a place where fire is like a cool breeze. I burned in the fire of my own malice for 50 years. Now it's your turn to taste it." Anthony backed away until he hit the same boulder with the bloody writing on it. Now the writing was completely gone, leaving only a black, soot-covered surface. He had no escape. Behind him was the stone, and before him was me, a semi-charred being smelling of death and gasoline. Suddenly, Anthony dropped the wood. He raised his hands. He closed his eyes and began to hum. I thought he was saying a prayer, but as I got closer, I saw he was singing an old song. The same song the four of us used to sing in my grandfather's yard when we were 10 years old. Suddenly, a killing blow hit the heart of the Thomas hiding underneath. For a moment, just for a moment, control of my eyes returned to me. I saw my friend, the only one left for me from that cursed night, embracing death with a face full of tears. With my own voice, the voice of the real Thomas, I screamed, "Anthony, run, kill me, strike my heart right now. I can't hold him back." Anthony opened his eyes. A light of hope and horror shone in his gaze. With a swift movement, he picked up Christopher's knife that had fallen on the ground. But before he could do anything, that evil spirit took over my entire brain again like a black wave. My hand moved as if a steel spring had been released. I grabbed Anthony's wrist and squeezed so hard I heard the sound of his bones crushing. Anthony let out a groan of pain and the knife fell from his hand. With that supernatural strength, I lifted him and slammed him against the boulder. His head hit the stone and his warm blood splattered onto my burnt face. That spirit was winning. I felt as if no trace of Thomas remained. I was preparing to tear Anthony's carotid artery with my bare hands. But Anthony, with his one good hand, suddenly grabbed my collar and pulled me forward. His face pressed against mine. I could smell the blood in his mouth. With a bloody smile, he whispered into my ear, "Thomas, you forgot. Your grandfather said treasure is always a trap to awaken sacrifice." Before I realized what was happening, Anthony pushed me back with all the strength he had left, right toward the pit where the fire was blazing and where an extra barrel of gasoline we had brought for the car, now heated up, was sitting. We were thrown together into the center of the fire. This is real hell, the place where there is no longer a boundary between the flames of fire and the veins of your body. Anthony and I were drowned together in that burning mass. The sound of the gasoline barrel exploding was like a mountain collapsing. For a few moments, the world turned completely white for me. I felt no pain and heard no sound. Just an absolute void, as if I were experiencing an endless fall. But that spirit, that cursed spirit, didn't want to burn with me so easily. In the midst of that chaos of fire and smoke, I felt something tearing away from inside my chest. It was as if someone with coarse hands was pulling my soul out from between my ribs. Suddenly, a black, thick, and foul-smelling mass, like a living smoke, burst out of my mouth and ears. That malevolent spirit, that 50-year-old criminal, could no longer stay in my burnt and disintegrating carcass. I lay on the hot ground. My body had no life left in it, but my eyes were still open. I saw that black smoke gradually take shape on the ground. That being was no longer a vague shadow. It had taken the form of that same 40-year-old criminal, with those same old clothes and a face that seemed made of rotting flesh. He stood beside my half-dead corpse, inhaling with pleasure the smoke rising from the burning of my friends. Anthony was a few meters away, his body scorched, trying to crawl on the ground. He had survived, but I wish he hadn't. The evil spirit, with footsteps that made no sound on the ground, moved toward Anthony. Anthony, who no longer even had the strength to scream, just stared at that horrific figure. The spirit stood over him, and, with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of a damp grave, said, "Did you think your sacrifice could stop me? You've only prepared a fresh victim for me. Now that the body of that foolish policeman is burnt, I need a new home. A home that smells of your fear." Anthony trembled. That spirit stretched its long, black hands toward Anthony's throat. I wanted to get up. I wanted to shout, but I was just a piece of burnt meat lying on the dirt. I saw that black smoke begin to plunge into Anthony's open mouth. Anthony thrashed about, his eyes bulging out of their sockets, and the veins in his neck stood out like ropes. But within a few seconds, everything went silent. Anthony was no longer shaking. He stood up slowly. He brushed the ashes off his burnt clothes. He turned toward me, but he was no longer Anthony. That kind gaze, those intelligent eyes, had been replaced by a pair of black pits full of malice. He looked at me, gave a bitter smirk, and without saying a word, headed toward the road, toward my car. He was returning to the world of the living, using my friend's body. Now I am left here alone. The sun is slowly rising from behind the burnt trees of the forest. Its light feels like torture to me. All around me lie the corpses of Joseph and Christopher, which are now just a handful of bones and burnt flesh. My car is no longer there. That evil spirit left with Anthony's body to take the real treasure with him, a second life in the guise of an innocent man. When the villagers come, they won't just find 4 corpses. They will find 3 corpses and an empty space that will remain a mystery forever. I am taking my last breaths. The smell of gasoline and burnt flesh has become my entire world. If one day you pass by that cemetery, or if you see a man on the road who looks like Anthony, but his eyes have no light, run. Know that the treasure we found is still looking for a victim. Greed. Greed is a bad thing, my friend. We came for gold, but what we got was a mass grave in a forest where morning never comes. The sound of that being's footsteps is still in my ears. Tap, tap, tap. He is reaching the city. And I don't even have a shadow anymore to take with me to the other world. This was our story. The story of 4 friends who thought 30 years of friendship could stop a hungry spirit. How foolish we were. How lonely. The sunlight is burning my eyes. Everything is turning dark. This time, this darkness isn't coming back. Beware of old maps. Beware of the sounds that come from beneath the earth, because some of the dead don't like being alone at all. They look for your body so they can commit crimes with your hands once again.